Hey, what's going on? It's Mike T. Nelson here from ExtremeHumanPerformance.com. And you've probably seen this one already, but it's very interesting. You can see it up on the screen here from CNN Health. Maybe not the best place I go for all my health information, but Twinkie diet helps nutrition professor lose 27 pounds. So if you've read any of my stuff before, I talk a lot about metabolic flexibility. So if you go out to my blog here, shameless self-promotion, extremehumanperformance.com, it's talking about the metabolic flexibility recently in relation to the paleo diet. And it's a quote from a researcher. It says, greater reliance on fatty acids for fuel, along with the ability to conserve and replenish muscle glycogen, offered a distinct survival advantage as it allowed our Paleolithic ancestors to work, hunt and gather longer and more often. So in English, if you translate that, it means that if you're out sort of hunting and you can fast, so your body can actually use body fat for fuel, then that's going to be a good thing. And if you come across some food, be it either honey, God forbid, potatoes, or like here we've got the woolly mammoth, and you can eat it, that would be to your advantage. So the goal is to be as adaptable as possible. So to take in all sorts of different types of foods and to be able to use them for fuel efficiently. So one way you can monitor this to see if it's efficient or not is to see what sort of quote-unquote bad stuff, so I'm doing little quotes here, bad stuff, shows up in the blood. So these would be high triglycerides, maybe higher levels of cholesterol, that type of thing. Cholesterol is a little bit more debatable. But so if we go back to our friend here, who was looking at the Twinkie diet, and looks like he's actually exercising a little bit of metabolic flexibility here. He's not just staying on Twinkies. He's got some, looks like some muffins there, some Swiss rolls, some nutty bars. So it's getting into good variety. If you read the article, it's pretty interesting. He goes on and he's talking about here, he did it as a class project. So he actually cut his calories from 1,800 calories. That's what he was consuming during this little experiment. Before he was consuming about 2,600. And as you would imagine, it doesn't sound like he changed his exercise per se. So calories in and calories out, no matter what Gary Taubes tell you, that does matter. And his body mass index went from 28.8 down to 24.9. So he actually lost weight. So assuming that he's not really any change in his exercise, so the calories out part of the equation hasn't changed, he dropped his calories in, about 800 calories a day. So it's about 3,500 calories to gain or lose a pound of fat. So he's probably losing about 1.5 pounds of fat per week. Again, assuming everything else stays the same. Those are just very simple calculations. What's interesting is that his cholesterol dropped, LDL, 20%. His good cholesterol, HDL, actually went up, and his levels of triglycerides, so sort of those fats you don't really want necessarily in the blood, actually went down. Looks like reduced by 39%. So, despite what he was eating here, if you go by our current definition of health, or one of them, he actually became healthier, right? His blood lipids actually got better, and he lost weight. So far that's good. So he just goes on to say that, 2/3 of his total intake was mostly from junk food. He also had a multivitamin and a protein shake each day, ate some vegetables with the family, so wasn't entirely junk food, but, a lot of it was. And he actually got thinner. So if you measure body fat, he went from 33.4 to 24.9, which is pretty good. And so they've got some other quotes in here. And the takeaway is so far that by losing weight, it seems like he actually became healthier, despite eating a diet of 2/3 of the time what most people would say is, not very good at all. So it goes on to talk a little bit more about it here. But he brings up a really good question at the end. Um, he says, I wish I could say the outcomes are unhealthy. I wish I could say it is healthy. It's like I'm not confident enough in doing that, which frustrates a lot of people. So one side said it's irresponsible, it's unhealthy, but the data doesn't say that. So what he's saying is that he actually went out and did his own little experiment so far, and he measured markers of what we believe is currently health, so blood lipid levels, and by those standards, he actually got healthier. So how I interpret this a little bit is, again, it's a short-term experiment done with an N of 1, but the reality is when you're working on yourself or maybe on a small group of athletes, the research is only going to sort of point you in the direction. And it's actually their results is what you're most concerned about, and the reality is that's what they're going to pay you for anyway. He also brings up a good question is, well, what and how do we really determine health? Is health only determined by, maybe certain markers, HDL, LDL, that type of thing? So that's also a really good point. So my takeaway is that he's probably pretty metabolically flexible. He can actually take in what we consider as sort of bad foods, and while he is losing weight in the process, according to what our current definition of health is, that, yeah, he's probably doing all right. It's interesting if you read some of the comments down here. I don't know any of these people or whatever. People are actually pretty polarized, which is quite interesting. Some people earlier, I probably can't find them now, stating that, oh, well, he's just going to have a heart attack now, and he's becoming extremely unhealthy. Well, not really by what our definition of health is. So I thought this is very interesting. So if you're working with people who are quote-unquote pretty metabolically healthy, they're very metabolically flexible, the reality is they can probably get away with more sort of junk food or quote-unquote bad foods than you would imagine. In most clients, their goal is to get the result that they're after, which can be body composition, performance goals, and it's ironically usually going to be with the least amount of effort. So if you could come up with a protocol, maybe similar to this, maybe not quite as extreme, and they were still getting the results that they were, I'd say that's for up to them to decide. You can always argue, well, maybe you'll get cancer later, or maybe some other disease will show up because you haven't been eating your fruits and vegetables, and maybe. Unfortunately, we know that there's epidemiologic data showing that fruits and vegetables do decrease rates of cancer and everything overall. The hard part is trying to determine on an individual level what is your risk. So I thought this was very, very interesting. A long time ago, I had a joke that I was going to do the cookie diet, where the only thing you could eat was like chocolate chip cookies all the time. And if you ate less of that amount than what your caloric intake was, that you'd actually lose weight. Now, if you didn't have enough significant protein and other things, you may not look the greatest. You may have lost some muscle mass in the process, especially if you don't exercise or do any resistance training. But you probably would lose weight. And if we look in some other studies showing that just weight loss alone actually does a huge thing to help normalize what we consider healthy. So looking at, say, for example, blood lipids. We know that your blood lipid profile will get much better for most people if they lose weight. So again, their healthy weight, I think, should also be a very high determinant of your health, which gets into another debate which we won't talk about now, which is sort of, can you be fat and fit? That's a separate debate. So the takeaway on this one related to metabolic flexibility is that in someone who is healthy, I actually think their body should be able to process some quote-unquote bad foods from time to time with not a lot of side effects. Now, this doesn't mean that you're going to make your whole diet the rest of your life off of, nutty bars and Swiss rolls. So it's hard to argue that those foods are very nutrient dense. You're probably not getting a lot of the nutrients that you need from them. But at the same point, the response in the body is what you actually want to be concerned about. I believe that it's someone who's rather healthy, eating those things on occasion. Maybe not to the extreme that this guy went. If you're monitoring your blood levels and health, and they're still in line, that's a decision that you'd have to make. Biggest thing is that most people never actually take the time to conduct their own little experiment and see how much they can actually get away with and decide from there. So, thought this was pretty interesting. You can find it on CNN.com. And I'm Mike T. Nelson. You can find me over at ExtremeHumanPerformance.com. So, check it out. Thank you very much.